Am I live? I hope so. This is going to be a keep your fingers crossed kind of Sunday morning, folks. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Sunday morning Coffee with Cioffi show. Our attempt at doing a stress free Sunday morning weathercast with your Sunday coffee in hand. And maybe you got a bagel or a little bit of breakfast going with you at the same time, and that's a good thing. So let me, before we do anything, I have to bring in a few other sources of viewers. I'm inviting the folks on the weather app, on the meteorologist Joe Cioffi weather app, to actually watch it live from said weather app, and also want to invite my followers on Twitter, the few followers I have on LinkedIn, and the Facebook followers will be joining shortly. So for those of you who are joining from those various other sources, we bid you a very nice good morning. And there I am. Okay, so you'll notice that on this Sunday morning, the goatee is a little bigger, a little thicker, and it's going to take another, well, let's say another couple of weeks to really fill in. My haircut guy is going to clean it up for me tomorrow. And I got my coffee, so there it is. I hope you guys have yours. Mine, by the way, just so you know, is a mix today of 8 o'clock, I believe it's a Brazilian roast, 8 o'clock coffee, the 8 o'clock French vanilla, and a little bit of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. So I've got 1/3 of each. I've done that a lot of times where I kind of mix flavors, so I wind up with sort of like blueberry, hazelnut, French vanilla, cinnamon stuff. It's amazing. All used to just be a simple cup of coffee. Anyway, all right, so we've got a lot of weather going on this morning. Of course, we have a storm system impacting the Northeast. We also have some action going on out in the West that I find pretty interesting, and I'm going to be we're going to spend some time with that. We've got a really fascinating long range, I think. And of course, that all is going to get kicked underway by a very important storm for Wednesday. The Wednesday storm system is really important for the long range pattern because it's the one that sets the ball rolling for the rather blocky look that we're going to have. And by the way, let me make this really clear. There is no guarantee for you snow lovers that are watching, wherever you happen to be watching. There's absolutely no guarantee that this rather dynamic looking pattern is going to produce anything. There's no guarantee that it won't, if it does produce something, that it could wind up being mostly rain. So just bear that in mind. When we look at the source regions of how all these blocks form, you're talking about it covering a whole lot of geography. And it all, at the end of the day, boils down to where is the trough? Where is the ridge? Where is the surface high? Where is the low-level cold air? You could have all of this happening in the broad sense, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your storm is going to be in that 100-mile or 200-mile target zone that is going to be a snow producer for your area, or actually it might be a snow producer for one of you and not be a snow producer for another. In the West, by the way, it just gets really crazy this week, and we have a number of folks that watch from the western part of the United States. And what I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to this week on Wednesday into Thursday is a system that is actually out that's going to develop in the Pacific subtropics, just off the coast of Baja California, and that a lot of that tropical moisture is shooting northward So I'm going to be curious to see what the outcome of this is going to be for parts of New Mexico, particularly also for eastern Colorado and western Kansas, western Oklahoma, and northwest Texas. It'll be interesting to see how much of that tropical moisture moves northward into cold air that is going to be in the southwest. And also, we're going to see energy working its way down through California, through central and southern California. We might even be hearing about snows in places in Southern California late this week, right around Thanksgiving Day, in fact, where you don't normally see snowfall. Actually, in a lot of the mountains that are up in Southern California, you do wind up with some snow in those mountains, and it usually happens in situations like this where you get this, deep upper low that drops down into the west. So I think we've got everybody on board. I have my chat, my Skype opened up and my phone ready just in case Mr. Rayo decides to call in, which of course he's always welcome to do. But I know him. He's watching Sunday Morning on CBS, which is probably one of the I think it's one of the best news programs around, and one of the few that I try to catch every once in a while, especially for some of the really odd and different stories that they do. Some of the artsy stuff, I guess, if you want to call it that, or when they go to different places around the world, or as they did not too recently, do a whole show on the International Cheese Championships that were being held in Wisconsin. That was really fascinating. Okay, let's get to weather. I've got the chat board on the side here, and they changed this way we do things on YouTube these days, so it's a little bit different. So I may be able to see the chat, I may not be able to see the chat, and my biggest concern right now is the fact that the internet is not going to hold up. So keeping my fingers crossed that everything goes according to plan. By the way, when we're done with the weather part of this, please, on the chat board, be sure, if you've got something you want covered, because we've got time this morning, let me know. And we'll try and do something. I'll try to bring up whatever I need to bring up map-wise to answer your question. So I'm starting off today. Usually we start off in the east. Well, today we're going to start off in the west, and we have the snow forecast map from the Weather Service with regards to the snow. This is through Wednesday morning, so there's a lot of stuff here that's not showing up yet. But you see how it does, at least from the standpoint of what the Weather Service is forecasting here, snow-wise, with a stripe of three, let's call it 3 to 6 inch snows from Wisconsin southwest into Kansas and into Nebraska, northwest Kansas, Nebraska, and into southern Wyoming, southeastern Wyoming, and around the northeastern quarter of Colorado. Now, bear in mind that this is through Wednesday morning, and what I was talking about earlier with respect to the system that is out, that's going to be off of California, Southern California, and down off Baja California, that doesn't really get involved in here until later Wednesday night or on Thursday. And in the meantime, we're seeing snow up the Sierra Nevadas of size on up the coast through and inland of the coast in California into Oregon and Washington, and also up through much of the northern Rockies. So and I'm paying attention to this because of the fact that the way the pattern is evolving. This is this is going to be a very important part of the equation. The snow that you're seeing, by the way, in Nebraska and on up through Wisconsin, we've got one low coming out for Tuesday into Wednesday. And that's the one that is going to be really important for this whole blocking pattern that wants to set up. And then we have the snow that's left over from today in the Northeast, where we're seeing, 1 to, let's call it at least from New Hampshire northeastward up into Maine. We've got some we'll call it a 3 to 6 inch snow band. There's also a little bit of back edge snow going on this morning in parts of eastern Pennsylvania, particularly in south central Pennsylvania, where we saw it show up on the radars. And that is going to last probably for not much longer. I'm thinking after about 11 o'clock or so, whatever's there on the radar is going to disappear on us. I'm just, by the way, I'm trying to pull up the chat on my phone so I can watch. It'll just take me 1 second here to bring it up. And
snap photos of your receipts and get organized.
Okay, let me get this ad off. Hang on. Oh, good. Sounds like I have pretty decent audio. Well, we got 108 folks on this morning. That's excellent. Okay, so far so good. 10 minutes in, haven't lost a signal. So you see what we're dealing with here, at least into Wednesday. The radar this morning, as of 10:10, that back edge of precip that's down back in eastern Pennsylvania. That's what I saw a few reports at Williamsport, State College, in and around or just west of Harrisburg, seeing some snow in there. Temperatures are very tenuous here. They're pretty much between 33 and 35. So you get a little intensity. It probably puts down the quick coating. And since there really isn't a whole lot of cold air with this, only whatever you have aloft, once it stops, it all melts. We had some solid rain overnight in southern New England and over Long Island and back through parts of south and central New Jersey. That has all pushed up northward now, and you're seeing that precip move up the Hudson Valley into southern Vermont, New Hampshire, and of course this is setting up for some snow for northeastern New York from the Catskills northeastward to I-90 points north, and then you head up into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, as we showed you earlier on the snowfall forecast map. There isn't a whole lot happening around the rest of the country. You've got a little bit of precip here in parts of the Dakotas and Minnesota, and also back through down to Iowa and Kansas. I don't know how much of this is real and how much it is ground clutter. And out in the West, at least for now, things are very, very quiet. So we're in good shape there. And I see a few of you mentioning the fact on the chat this morning that some snow in south central PA. Mark Gladfelter, yes, most definitely. But more than likely, very, very soon, this stuff is going to pull out. And this, by the way, this area that's in eastern PA, the back edge, it's going to move across New Jersey probably as some rain showers. So while the steady rain may be over with that first batch moving up, the low is still taking its sweet time moving northeastward and won't get out of the way for a while yet. So we've got a raw day in store. I brought this up yesterday on the Patreon members Weather in 10 video that I did yesterday afternoon to explain what's going on long range and with the whole notion of this blocking pattern that's going to be setting up. And this is the beginnings of it. But there are a couple of things here that I think are important to the scope of the long-range weather pattern. First off, what really stands out to me here is this rather impressive. I mean, I really think this is quite impressive to see this tropical moisture. The band is actually, look at how it's connected, okay? I'm just going to borderline the area here. I'll make that line just a little bit smaller. And I mean, talk about a train of connection here of all this tropical moisture. And if you look at the loop very closely, you've got a upper low sitting off the coast of Southern California that's basically driving this really long train of tropical and subtropical moisture into, this is at mid-level, the mid-level part of the atmosphere, over Baja California, into Mexico, New Mexico, Arizona, and out over into Texas. And actually, you can follow that train along across the Gulf states, and it turns up the eastern seaboard. So this is a pretty solid stream of moisture that is going to play a role here in the weather this week. And of course, what we were talking about in terms of the subtropical system actually starts to develop today somewhere down in this vicinity, and then begins, we'll be moving on up to the northeast. All the weather models have this, and the moisture from it is going to wind up pushing up northward into New Mexico and Colorado, because now you're going to have this energy in the west, in the Pacific. Energy from this upper low that's way out in the Pacific Ocean at the moment is going to push that energy into the northwest, and you're going to wind up seeing it drop down southward through California later this week, and it all comes to play in the western part of the United States. This is, by the way, I have to tell you, it's been a long time since maybe going back to the setup with the four Easters, the four nor'easters back in March of 2018. This is one of the more fascinating patterns that I've seen set up in a while. Last winter, remember we had that Pacific fire hose jet that. Oh, by the way, I'm being told there's an inch in Red Lion, Pennsylvania, and still snowing. Got you. That's from JG Warner. Appreciate it, buddy. Thank you very much for that, and for that anytime, by the way, if you got observations when we get these big storms underway, don't be shy about sharing them, because they do they are very useful when it comes to trying to forecast this sort of stuff. So, taking a look at what's happening here, you got this streaming energy moving into the southwest, eventually moving into the southwest. You've got this upper low that is sitting off the coast of California, all being part of the drivers here. Now, back in the east, we have our low that's sitting right along the New Jersey coast, a warm front to just south of Long Island. Winds have shifted around back to the northwest. There's just a little hook of precip here on the northwest side of that low center that's producing some snows in a few places. And then, of course, it's all advancing on up into New England, where the air is definitely colder. We're seeing temperatures down in the 20s this morning at 7 a.m. In the interior areas, and low 30s right along the immediate coast. No high this time around, by the way. It's not like we had a high to the north. We actually have low pressure sitting up north of Lake Superior. Maybe if we had some kind of high up there, we would have wound up with a bit more in the way of snow, particularly areas further south and just away from the coast, but not to be the case this time around. And of course, quiet out in the west, at least for now, as we start to set the table with this weather system coming in for the western part of the U.S. I'm just going to check really fast here. If you go to weather.gov, I don't know if you folks ever do this. Well, first off, this is the watches and warnings. The preemptive winter storm watches are now up for the Sierra Nevadas, Northern California, southeastern Oregon, including the coastal counties, by the way. We have winter storm watches going up for parts of southern Nevada or Nevada. We also have winter storm watches up for the northeastern quarter of Colorado, southeastern Wyoming, and southwestern Nebraska, northwestern Kansas for 4 counties there. And in the northeast, we have winter weather advisories from northeastern PA up into the Catskills. We also have winter weather advisories up for a few of the counties from the northwestern corner of Connecticut, so northern Litchfield County, the westernmost counties of Massachusetts, and then on up and through Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine, half of New Hampshire and Maine. Winter storm warnings, northeastern New Hampshire, and on up into north. With Maine, it's just kind of an odd state in its shape, because when I look at it and I think northwestern Maine, I want to go to one of the Maine rabbit, what I call the rabbit ears, the one that's up to the left. But you see where the winter storm warnings are. And also, large area of winter storm warnings up in Alaska is a huge state, size-wise. It's bigger than Texas. It's bigger than California. I think it's 2.5 times the size of the state of Texas. But you're seeing a fairly large portion of the state there with winter storm warnings and winter storm watches up to the east of there. One of the things when you go look at the local forecast, of course, it all has to do with whether it's mountain or valleys, and sometimes you could have these winter storm warnings up, and you read the forecast for a particular spot, and they are only going for like an inch or two. Particularly when you get up into the North Slope, where heavy snowfalls are rare once the Arctic Ocean has frozen over. But it's kind of interesting. If you haven't done that and you go to weather.gov, go pull up the Alaska and take a look at some of the forecasts. They're forecasts that you don't normally see. I'm just gonna Tony M. Are you can I don't think YouTube allows you to put. I can, as the host, put a link up, and I think it shows up. I believe when I put links up, they show up. I think when you guys do it on the chat, they don't. It's not something that I'm controlling. I think that's a general YouTube thing. But if I get a chance, I will take a look and see if there's a setting involved that I might have to change. Timothy, I can, and I think it's possibly that the moderators can as well. We'll figure something out with that maybe down the road. If you've got an important link you think is worth sharing, you can always send it to me, and then I can share it for you. Does anyone know how the people of the Chain Islands of Alaska, a 6.4 magnitude earthquake? Pamela Gasper did not know that. We'll check that out. Let's check that out after I'm done with the weather chat, and we'll see if we can get any kind of news headlines that are breaking out of that. Let's see. Yes, I can. The links. YouTube takes the links off. All right, so there's your watches and warnings that are up. What I wanted to do was we'll check out some of the observations. If you go to current conditions, and this is the easy way, current conditions and observation list. So you get the hourly obs, and it looks like Coatesville, mixed precip 37, Lancaster, light snow in 34, light rain in Pottstown 38. I don't know where Perkasie, Pennsylvania is, heavy rain there. Light snow in Mount Pocono, but that's elevation. Most of the reporting stations here are really just kind of reporting light rain or light snow, and you see where the temperatures are here. Nobody's below 32, even at Mount Pocono. I believe Mount Pocono's 33. So you got to get intensity. Intensity causes the snow to stick. As soon as it stops, the snow will just go away. Okay, so let me go back to this. I'm going to switch. Let's switch to the continental U.S. on the satellite loop here. Hang on one second, folks. Okay. Bring this up. There we go. And I think I can make this a little bit smaller now. Yeah. There we go. So that's the standard size, 100%. So here's your U.S. satellite view this morning with our, rather a little hook there on the satellite with the cloud structure. But notice once you go down into Virginia and into North and South Carolina, it's absolutely clear there. So the cloud line, the clearing line is pretty sharp, but it's going to take time. We've got to get this thing to get out of the way. I'll add a few extra frames here so that we can see it progress from earlier this morning past sunrise. And it's not, the clearing not that far away, but the clouds are not moving east with any kind of speed. The back edge of the cloud cover in central Pennsylvania, you can see a little sliver of clearing trying to work down in between that and some clouds that are back out to the west. Dry across the plains, much of the Gulf states and northern Florida. You have some clouds in southern Florida, wet cold front moving through there, and of course you see the two stream areas that are streaming in. One from the Pacific, that's coming into inland into Oregon and northern California and extends into Montana and Wyoming. And of course, you can also see that area down in the southwest that is streaming northward. So let's take a look at the models. I'm going to start with the GFS in the southwest, in the west, because of again, I'm really interested in this area here that is moving across Baja California. It's not often that you see this, and that's why I'm just kind of paying attention to the amount of tropical moisture that the models are generating. I'm just wondering whether we might hear about some surprises here. This is for Wednesday. Not much happens ahead of it, so let's run back and set you up through tonight and into tomorrow. And of course, we start to see some energy that comes in from that flow in the Pacific. We're still not quite yet seeing the main thrust of moisture from the system near Baja California. So that comes along about Tuesday night or Wednesday, even though the first low starts to pop up there in the subtropics later today. At this stage, by the way, your energy that is coming eastward creates snow across much of Colorado. This 995 low. This is the seedling the seedling low that is going to be the system that is going to start driving the whole blocking pattern. That's going to become a big storm once it passes across northern New England and heads off the coast of eastern Canada. And you still, by the way, have a ton of energy coming in from the northwest that's going to be dropping down the west coast. And then, of course, you've got that southern stream that I've been talking about with respect to the subtropics. So our low goes out. This snow is also going to spread into parts of Iowa and Wisconsin, and that's from the snowfall map that you saw from earlier. So basically, this area in here is going to benefit from low pressure, this first low that is running up to the northeast. This was a low, by the way, if you remember back last week, the early part of last week, where models were making a very deep storm, taking pressures down into the 970s, taking a low up into Wisconsin and Minnesota, not doing that. And I want you to pay attention to that factor because of the fact that when we look at the longer range, from the overnight models, I'll take you back to what the GFS did yesterday. When we go look at the longer range, we are still in the time frame where these models are going to change quite a bit, and it's all going to be about with a blocking and how strong the blocking is or isn't. Meanwhile, on Tuesday late afternoon, look at this low that's coming, 987 low. That's a fairly deep wrapped up low heading into southeast Oregon and northern California, and it's going to just drop southward. Comes ashore as a 980 low. The gradient's pretty tight here, so we'll probably have some strong winds that are going to develop in northeastern California and in northwestern California and in southwestern Oregon, and even further up the coast from there. Up the gradient's pretty tight all the way up to southern Washington state. That low comes in, all that energy drops southward, and you see here how you get into that heavy snow that shows up in parts of the Sierra Nevadas and down in through central and southern Nevada, and eventually swings out into Utah. Rain, by the way, and probably much needed rain, is going to drive southward through California into southern California, and this is going to hang out for a while. Also, watch how it is also, this large system is also the driver of this moisture that is coming up from the subtropical zone and heading into New Mexico and Texas. And this is where I'm again especially interested to see how that plays out in terms of the total snowfall. So a lot of action here in the western part of the U.S. For the first half of this week. And of course, as we go through the latter part of the week, that second low that drops in eventually starts to shift eastward into Utah and Colorado. And you've got, and let's be cautious about that pressure there in eastern Colorado. Not 100% certain it's going to be that deep, but you do have a fairly large area of snow being indicated, at least by the GFS model. But look at this with a grain of salt, because the unstable nature of this developing blocking pattern is going to make weather models do all sorts of weird things along the way. Now let's switch to the east and take a look at what's going on there and what's happening in the eastern part of the United States. Well, first off, of course, after we get rid of today's weather system, we have the next one coming out, and there's your low into southern Wisconsin. And the trailing cold front. The low starts to deepen a bit, getting into the 980s. We have a weather front approaching the East Coast. This is Wednesday afternoon. I'm amazed, by the way, of how the GFS loves to, on its long range, bring fronts through during the more early part of the day, and they inevitably wind up being much later. But this is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. The weather front is now indicated to be much further to the west. So it doesn't look like it reaches the coast of the immediate East Coast until late afternoon or early evening. And as we roll the GFS along, a lot of those showers basically fall apart. The radar, I think, view is probably better here, so we'll switch over. But here's the radar view, and there you have, whatever showers you have in the morning, and then into early afternoon, and then it just kind of, somewhere between 1 and 7 o'clock, a couple of showers sweep across the Northeast. What is especially important, though, I think, for Thanksgiving Day, is the fact that the pressure gradient here behind the frontal passage, as the low moves across from Lake Huron to northern New England, you've got a very tight pressure gradient that starts to develop, and it particularly tightens up Wednesday night and Thursday. And that might mean some issues for parades. The Macy's Day Parade, of course, with balloons. They have trouble when they get wind gusts in excess of 20, 25 miles an hour or more. And I think we could certainly see gusts up 30 to 35 miles an hour or more during Thursday morning. This is Thursday morning's map. And we have low pressure sitting just between the coast of Maine and the western shores of Nova Scotia. But you see all the isobars here. I mean, this is really pretty tight. And you've got a 1040-ish high, which is off the screen in Canada, that is building in. And meanwhile, that southwest moisture, that subtropical moisture with snow, that has carried its way up into Kansas and northern Oklahoma, Missouri, and southern Nebraska. Now, this area is going to be weakening as it moves eastward. The western low is going to take over, and then we'll see that area kind of shrink and dry up as it moves to the east. It doesn't have a whole lot of support because of all the action out in the west. And of course, your low in Nova Scotia, you'll notice here going into Friday, you still got a lot of isobars there that are just offshore. And this is going to be, again, very important in terms of the longer term outcome. And I can tell you this, in terms of what the overnight model runs did versus yesterday's model runs, it really is about how it handles the block now, or the developing block. So time, I think, now to just bring up the whole U.S. And you can see things a bit better here. So we'll run it back, and you can watch this all play out for the coming week. So here's our first low that is going out now. You see that on the lower left, you can see the stuff that is in on the Pacific side, starting to organize a bit and shoot up to the northeast. And by the way, the Hurricane Center, last I checked, I didn't actually check it this morning, but when I checked it last night, they weren't talking about it, anything with respect to any kind of tropical low coming out of this. But it does have tropical-like features. Certainly the moisture is tropical. In the meantime, you see our map for Wednesday night. If you're traveling around, you know from this where it's going to be a problem. And of course, with winds increasing in the northeast down into the north mid-Atlantic states, that's liable to cause some airport delays, so just bear that in mind. And then, as we run ahead to the end of the week, it's no issues weather-wise pretty much east of the Mississippi until you get to Friday with that area coming in. And of course, now you're starting to see the models wrap up a low in northeastern Colorado. And I'm going to stop the maps here because I want to switch now to the upper air and talk about the developing block. Let's run back here on the GFS, and we've been noticing that the upper air is definitely in transition. But I want to show you. I'm back now to Friday on the upper air where we had a trough go by, and of course we had a front on Friday. Saturday was the better of the 2 weekend days. Clearly, now you've got this energy. That we've been talking about this split flow pattern. That has been driving things recently. And also, by the way, the thing about the split flow pattern that we've had is what's important about it what's really important about it is the fact that it is defining a much different look of the weather pattern in the Pacific versus last year. So here's your southern part of the jet stream, and then of course you've got the northern part that splits off and goes up into Canada. Drops a little trough there. So you've got two jet streams at work. You don't really have any kind of strong Canadian connection here. So there's not a whole lot of cold air that's coming down. At best, we have seasonal air, let's call it. Nothing like what we had a couple of weeks ago. Howard's just telling me, does he check for me, Howard Vanderhoff, that I assume you mean on the Pacific side, tropical cyclone activity not expected during the next 48 hours. Check, Howard, if you can, check the 5-day map and see if it shows up on their 5-day map, whether they've got something, because this would be for Tuesday, Wednesday, if the low was out there. But as of yesterday, they didn't mention it, so I don't know why they would mention it today if they didn't mention it yesterday. So here's our jet stream through the weekend, and of course, we've got our system for today, which is going by. Now watch here as we move. This is Monday, Tuesday, and now we're going to go into Wednesday. And I'm at Wednesday morning. The system to pay close attention was a couple to pay close attention to, but focus on this one here because that is the one that really drives all the changes that are going to be occurring back in this zone in the next from Wednesday right through the weekend. Okay, so as we move this system forward. We'll move the maps forward and watch that low that moves now through the Great Lakes, and it's in New England at this point, Thanksgiving morning, and then it just wraps up and explodes southeast of Newfoundland and just sits there through the weekend. This is what can be referred to as a 50-50 low. Okay, and the 50-50 low is a upper low that is at 50 north and 50 west. And it has been observed that in many bigger East Coast snowstorms, the setup begins with a low sitting out at 50 north and 50 west that hangs around there for at least a few days. Because it needs to do that. It can't just go to 50 and 50 and then just keep on going. It's got to move out in that general vicinity, stall out for a couple of days at the very least, because the stalling process forces the next weather system to take a much more southern track, and it also creates a way for colder air to overwhelm eastern Canada, even central Canada, and then gradually bleed its way down southward into the northeast Great Lakes and mid-Atlantic states. It is not it's not a perfect indicator and it's not an end all. And what becomes particularly frustrating from a forecast standpoint with a situation like this is a very blocky pattern. If we've talked about that East Pacific oscillation, that negative East Pacific oscillation, well, this is about, I think, if I were to pull a teleconnection snapshot of this, I would guess that the East Pacific oscillation numbers are pretty strongly negative looking at this. But the area of change that the storm at 50/50 drives is the subsequent shortwave that follows, which is, by the way, circled. Even though I circled it for the first one, it's there for the second one. And then, of course, you look back and see how it changes out off the Pacific coast as well, because you've got another really strong blocking. Not only do you have a blocking low, but you have a ridge of high pressure and actually a blocking high up into the Gulf of Alaska to the north of it. And, by the way, at this point in the longer range, and we're at Tuesday, December 3rd, you've got a Canadian connection here of cold air. Split flow out in the Pacific, deep trough in the eastern part of the United States. And this is after whatever happens next weekend and early next week is gone. Upper high off in the Gulf of Alaska to the north of this deep upper low that is sitting off the California coast. But you see the Canadian connection here that gets established, and that brings down very cold. That should bring down very cold air into that shaded area of blue that you see in the upper air. And this map is actually for Tuesday, December 3rd. So we seem to be driving into a rather dynamic pattern. Now, I have to tell you that originally, if you back up a few days ago when we were looking at the teleconnections, I was thinking around December 3rd, 4th, or 5th, somewhere in there, where we could wind up seeing something occur. And that I think that may actually still be on the table, because there may be something here. See how the trough just kind of swings around? There's an arm that up in that trough that tries to swing around toward the Ohio Valley right in here. Whoops, sorry, let me just erase that again. Right there, along about December 4th or 5th. So regardless of whatever happens as we move into Sunday and Monday of next week or Tuesday, there's more energy behind it, and it looks like there might be some more energy behind that. So could prove for some very interesting weather here as we get into the first part of the month of December. And please remember where we are in the calendar. This is very, very early in the game. Now, what are the keys to the forecast going forward? Well, I'm going to tell you right off the bat, it's all really going to depend, at least for next weekend. It's all going to be in the hands of the upper low that forms off the coast here near Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. That's the system that rolls through the Great Lakes on Wednesday. That is going to drive everything that happens behind it. You have this system here that's coming out. You've got this Pacific. I mean, this is crazy stuff. This is what a block looks like, by the way. This is what a blocking pattern looks like. Higher than normal pressures all across Canada and through the North Atlantic. This is something that you don't see very often, where usually you've got your upper lows up in Canada, okay, and that's normal. Your jet stream is going from west to east. When we say the jet moves from west to east, that is often described as the normal jet stream flow, when in reality, in weather, it's not very often that you actually see that. There's always more volatility. Well, this is about as volatile as it gets. And your upper lows are all way to the south of where they normally should be. South of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, two other ones, the one in the Central Plains there and the other one that's off the coast of California. So your main jet stream is way to the south. And in a situation like this, you do have some cold air. There's cold air There's a little upper low sitting in Hudson Bay. It's very weak, but there is at least the attempt of some cold air coming down through Canada, and it shows up more on the surface than anything else. One of the things about blocks that with lows out at 50 and 50, models have a very difficult time figuring out how long are they going to sit there, and how strong are they going to get, and are they going to pull out faster or slower than modeled. We had yesterday on the day run of the GFS, and I'm going to show you that now. We're going to switch over to surface maps. There's not going to be too much difference between these upper airs going forward from what I looked at from the overnight models, other than the fact that it's a matter of timing, and the one system that's off the coast, if that's deeper, if that's a little bit further to the west, if it holds on longer, it's going to force anything that's to its west to go more to the south as opposed to wanting to go up to the northeast. And this is what the GFS models were doing yesterday during the 2-day runs, the 12 and the 18Z run. And then last night, because of the fact that it takes this upper low and it's a little bit further to the east, moves it out a little bit faster, as a result, it wound up taking most of the energy to the northwest of the coast, and you wind up really with mostly a rain event with maybe some snow and ice well inland. I right now I'm not in any camp as far as what the outcome is going to be, because of the fact that we're still a long ways away. It's just interesting, you watch these models forecast blocking all the time, and I've said that how elusive the blocking is when the models show it in the long range, how it seldom shows up when we get in the short range. Well, now we're seeing it where we see it begin in 3 days. So this is going to happen. What we don't know is the extent of which this all takes place. So let's bring back the surface maps now. I'm going to go to the U.S. surface map here, and we're going to start with yesterday. So, and remember, this is all about the block that's to the east is going to really be the driver here in terms of, actually this is, they're already starting today's run. So let's go to, we'll go to 12Z Saturday's run. Look where your low, this is your low coming out for Tuesday and Wednesday, goes up to the Great Lakes. There's your action that we're talking about happening in the west and southwest. That is still happening, of course, and there's our low offshore, tight pressure gradient. Everything's pretty much the same at this point. Now, once we get to next weekend, this is on Saturday, you still have 1 million isobars from New York City eastward through the Gulf of Maine. And if you look at the upper right, you'll see the back edge of that storm is just sitting, you're still seeing snow even back through Nova Scotia. Because that's still there, if you look at the low that's coming out of the Rockies, heads up into Nebraska, actually drops down into Missouri and Illinois. And then at this point now, we're into next Sunday, where you still have the western part of that blocking low near Newfoundland producing, those isobars. The last isobars is down at Boston and Cape Cod. So it's holding on, and that really forces this low to go further to the south. I don't know what I did there. I kind of leaned too much on my laptop, but it did at least go far enough south yesterday where it did produce this area of ice and snow, your surface low that eventually winds up, going into Indiana and Ohio, redevelops near Delaware, near Chesapeake Bay, and then is off the coast of New Jersey and Long Island, and producing a fair expanding area of snow up at least through New England. Okay, not forecasting this, just kind of illustrating what the models did. Now let's switch to the 18Z, which I know everybody kind of went crazy over. And when I saw the upper air on that first, I was like, I knew that it just went crazy on the surface. Now, here was an instance on the 18Z where the blocking low east of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland was even stronger and further west. The last isobar Sunday morning, still back to Boston. You can see the high, by the way, the isobars of the high kind of enveloping around it. And of course, the surface low is being forced, trying to go northeastward toward the Great Lakes and can't do it. The energy gets forced down to coastal Virginia. Somehow, a big low gets wrapped up here south of Long Island and southeast of Cape Cod. This is on day 8 to day 9 on the long range from late yesterday afternoon, which of course we know is subject to huge change. And the models are reacting now specifically to that upper low to the east. So we go from this to the overnight runs. And the overnight runs were saying now, no, that blocking low to the east doesn't, even if it's for just a half a day sooner or a day sooner, it gets out of the way. The high, it gets out of the way actually much faster than what the models are doing, because you see where the high is. This is the high on Friday and Saturday down near James Bay. It pulls out a lot faster, a lot faster. Remember, the last isobar of the ocean system, the last isobar of the ocean system was at Boston. Okay, on the overnight run, it's near Halifax. I mean, that's huge. So it basically is pulling out faster and allows the low coming out from the west to run up to the northern lakes, gradually redevelops over Long Island. Now that's fine and dandy, but look where the low center is in the Gulf of Maine on Sunday night. With snow up in northern New England and back through the Great Lakes. Of course, it does turn cold behind. I think regardless of what happens, we are going to see colder air come in behind this. Now, let's jump to the 6Z run, because the 6Z run also has the same issue with the how it handles this blocking low. It starts to pull it out quicker, and as a result, you wind up with a system that is even further north than what it was on the prior run, and then it's a simple cold front. So here's the thing: it's very simple actually. If the upper low that's east of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, if it sits out there and sits out there for a few days, it's going to mean for a very interesting situation here as we move into next Sunday and Sunday night and Monday. If it pulls out, then you're going to wind up with what is probably going to be nothing more than a cold front. Because that's what this is really, and then we'll wait to see what it gets produced by energy dropping down with the cold upper trough, and you'll notice that the GFS does have something for the middle part of the following week, with a low dropping southeastward from Canada into Illinois and Ohio, and then something develops off the coastal waters with that colder air moving in to the areas east of the Mississippi. So look, a lot of variables here to play with. We're nowhere near where we need to be, and expect more model changes, but it will be how the models, it will be that upper low out in the Atlantic, and whether it does or doesn't get out of the way. These are the teleconnections, by the way, from yesterday's model runs. So I thought by now we would have today's. We unfortunately do not. But you see how negative the NAO is here through next week, and through next weekend starts to climb up toward the zero line around December 4th. So that's why I was thinking maybe that would be a time to see something develop. Also, the Pacific North America Index is deeply negative along about Tuesday, Wednesday. So that's that low coming out from the Central Rockies and running up toward the Great Lakes, and eventually becomes the big storm east of New England and Nova Scotia and Newfoundland. And then the PNA kind of rests right along the neutral line that first week of December. The EPO, the East Pacific Oscillation, goes negative during the middle part of this week. So this is where it's beginning to set up that colder air. Just because it's negative doesn't necessarily mean it instantly turns cold. What the index is telling you is that you're seeing the big pressure changes in the area, which is normally a cold air source for the United States, and you have to give it time. So it's setting the table up for colder air to come into the U.S. Later this week, but that cold air probably doesn't come into play until we get past the first few days of the month of December. And again, these are yesterday's teleconnections, which are very simply snapshots of the current model runs. They are really coincident indicators. They are not. They're really not that predictive. They are more telling you that, okay, here's all the pressure patterns. We do all the math, and this is what it looks like on the scale of things when it comes to pressure changes and whether they're one or two standard deviations above or below average. And they at least give you some confidence in terms of what the overall pattern is going to be. But as far as saying, hey, we have a negative NAO, therefore we must have a snowstorm, it just simply does not work that way. So I'm here with you guys on the chat board. My coffee is cold at this point. But anybody have any questions here? I'm just looking through how the point 40 and 70 is called the benchmark. Storms passing over that spot are usually snowstorms for New England I-95. Usually that is correct. Although if you look back, the benchmark is something that everybody pays so much attention to that I think oftentimes they miss the boat. It's not just at the benchmark, but it's also in and around the benchmark. When I went to school, I had a Professor Spar, and Joe Rayo will know this, but we talked. He was let's call him the creator of what was called the box. And the box was the area that is east of Virginia, New Jersey, and south of Long Island and southern New England, going out to about 70 west. And his research shows that the vast majority of snowstorms that occurred in the New York area, at least the New York City area, Long Island, New Jersey, that area, had to pass inside that particular box. But it wasn't the only factor, so that if you have, a low moving northward versus a low moving, eastward or east-northeastward, how the low moves makes a big deal in terms of, the outcome. But we have these sort of general, I guess we could call them rules, but there were so many exceptions to the rules that sometimes you wonder how handy those rules really are, and they're not in weather. They're not absolutes. They're far from it. There are so many exceptions to so many rules that are out there that you can oftentimes find yourself making big forecast mistakes because you may have relied too much on one particular rule in order to come up with some sort of forecast, and it leads to your downfall, essentially. So I think that kind of wraps it up. We've had a very good hour today. John Trabacchino picked up 2 inches of snow this morning, and you're up in Western Mass with some elevation. 5.5 for the month, and your average snowfall is 6 in Williamstown, Massachusetts. So you know what? You're right in the range, and who knows? You still have you'll still have the next 7, including today. You've got 7 days, right? 24, 25, 26, or 7, 20. You've got 7 days to take you over the top 6 inches. You may have some opportunity to do it. You know what? Let's go back to the maps because it is 10:58. And we do have the new NAM, so let's take a look at that, and then we'll have some of the GFS, the new GFS, and we'll see what that does. And by the way, whatever the model does today, we still are going to not pay attention it still doesn't give us any kind of absolutes regarding what's going to happen. So we'll bring up the NAM first, and I'm going to put it up on the. I'm going to bring up the window. So hang on 1 second. I'm just setting it up. Where are we? There we go. So let's take a look at the new 12Z NAM model, and there is our low. Actually, the NAM's got this low way out at 37 and 71, but there's a low center on the northwestern part of that isobar that runs back into northwest New Jersey. So there's a low center probably right on the coast. And now you've got our low east of Cape Cod. Looks like the coastal low might take over if that's what the NAM is suggesting. And then you see this area of snow that expands in upstate New York during this afternoon and into this evening. So, hey, John Trabacchino, you still may not be done. Maybe you'll get one last burst with this after it goes by and into the Gulf of Maine. 978 low there by the time we get to early Monday morning should justify the snowfalls that we're going to see in interior Maine. Here we go for Tuesday, Monday night and Tuesday. Here's your low now in Colorado that moves out. So, Ruthless Goat, you've got your first round of snow here for Monday night. Well, actually, maybe some areas in northern Colorado Monday night into Tuesday morning. That's your low. That's going to wind up heading into the Great Lakes. And here we are now at Wednesday afternoon. Your cold front moving through the east. And here also you start to see that subtropical moisture that comes into New Mexico and Texas, and you've got your storm that moves into southwestern Oregon, northwestern California, that 984 low, and all that energy drops down in through southern California. The rainfall forecast amounts here, that's something I didn't do today. I didn't get WPC's rainfall. We've got the new NAM shooting up that subtropical moisture into New Mexico and Texas. Some hefty rain, some hefty precip for much of California, except the south. That'll probably come outside the forecast period. You have the precip that's going to be produced by the Colorado low heading on up to the northeast through the Great Lakes. And you also have some precip to worry. Some of this is from what's going on now. Actually, a good chunk of that is probably what is going on now. And then you have the additional snow and rain that will come after this forecast period is done. And just for laughs, if you want to see what we see on the NAM for snow, it actually picked up on the stuff that's going on in south central PA this morning. Again, that disappears before too long. And then it runs out to, you see the snow's just north of the Great Lakes and on up into northern New England. Your stripe of snow from northern Wisconsin back into Colorado, and the expanding area that's out off to the west. The GFS is out far enough to 102 hours, so that starts to show snows in New Mexico and West Texas. Same idea with the snows everywhere else. The rainfall here, the actual, let's go to the rainfall map before we do. So your rainfall map is not really that much different than what the GFS, the liquid precip, I should say. And with respect to everything going on at least through 84 hours, it's probably very close to what let's roll it back. But you only see this in 6-hour increments versus 1 and 3 hour increments on the NAM. There's your Colorado snow with the next low to the Great Lakes. There's your low strengthening as it moves into the Gulf of Maine. It's a 990 low. Yesterday, I think it had the low already down into the 970s. Now it's a 990. Starts to deepen. Gradient tightens and out to 108. Still... See, I'm just wondering now, again, this is an early guess and I don't know for sure. I wonder whether, the block on the models after, a few runs trying to show that blocking low holding, it may still today try to show that the block wants to move out. The one thing, by the way, I did notice on the European overnight, and I should address this, is that the European, which was showing the blocking low to the east moving out quickly actually on last night's run was slower in moving it out. So it kind of went a bit the opposite, not quite to the extreme of yesterday's day run GFS, but it kind of went to the opposite of what the GFS did to the overnight. So that's why when it comes to this sort of thing with weather, when we're in the long range, it really isn't about it's less about what the models are doing and more about coming to an understanding of what the overall pattern is. If you come to an understanding of what the overall pattern is, you can almost guess right much of the time, what exactly are the models going to do with all of this. And rather than, focusing energy on an utterly frustrating exercise of watching models go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's just a waste of time, and it doesn't really help you from a forecast standpoint. You can't lay out a forecast 5 or 6 days in advance with regards to anything with snow amounts or anything else. So you are given the luxury of time with respect to figuring it all out. As long as you know that you know what you're looking at, you know what the pattern is going to be, it makes figuring it out a whole lot easier. Chuck Cardillo, how much of Canada has snow on the ground? I think all of Canada has snow on the ground. When I checked the snow cover map a day or two ago, it was. I think there was one little sliver in southwestern Canada that didn't have anything there at that time. But I gotta believe that it's covered not only from south to north. Let's see if I can really fast pull up a snow cover. America snow cover map. There's all sorts of different. I have it bookmarked, but I always, I'm not good with. Good. Here it is. Latest map. So, yeah, here, Chuck, take a look. If you just Google North America snow cover, you can pull up these maps, but this is a good thing to take a look at. Whoops. And there you have it here. So there are those two patches there in British Columbia and the two provinces to the east. So I want to say Alberta. I used to know this a whole lot better, but you can see some patches here of no snow cover, but everywhere else in Canada there's snow cover, and also a sliver of snow cover right along the Canadian border. You got to remember, folks, in the U.S. this time of year, we're at November 24th. It's still hard to put snow cover down that lasts more than a day or two, because the normal temperatures are, while they're falling rapidly, they're still pretty high. The average high in New York City is still over the 50-degree mark this time of year. So, if we were to get a Thanksgiving, if we were to get a snowstorm this time of year, it is you can't keep the snow on the ground. It'll just melt because temperatures are going to try to reflexively bounce back to normal. You have to, you're talking about trying to keep your average high and low down near the freezing mark, at least for the average temperature for the day, and that means persistent 10 to 15 below temperatures running at least 10 to 15 degrees below normal, and even more on a day-to-day basis. So when you get snow this time of year in a lot of the areas in the Northeast, not talking about northern New England though, and upstate New York so much, but when you get snow this time of year, it doesn't last. Now, in a couple of weeks, the normal temperatures are dropping very rapidly. We lose 1 degree every 3 days or so. So your average high in New York City goes from being close to 50 at the end of November to just under 40 by the time we get toward the end of December. That's a 10-degree drop over 30 days. So that's a big deal. So if you start putting snow on the ground in the latter part of December, then that has a much better chance to stay on the ground as opposed to right now. Right now, it comes and goes, but certainly seeing all that snow cover in Canada, that's not, let's say it's not a bearish sign. It's probably it can be a bullish sign, but not always. But it certainly is not a bearish sign. All right, so I think we're done. It's been a wonderful Sunday. Did it without losing the signal. Thank you. So that was a good thing. So let's roll right along and just mention to you the fact that since on Sundays when we do this live stream early, we do our weather in 5 on Sundays late in the afternoons, and this way you can plan your week ahead. So we'll have a weather in 5 coming up this evening. Thanks for those of you who've been watching from the weather app or from Facebook. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, it's a good idea that you do. And if you have a Gmail account, you certainly can participate in the chat. So I encourage you to do that, and I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel because you are able to get notifications. These live streams, we do them almost every day. And tomorrow, of course, we're back to our nighttime live streams at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. Watch for website posts later on. Patreon members, those of you on my subscription platform, we'll see about doing a weather in 10 late today once we get all the weather models out, and we'll discuss where we're going with this blocking pattern going forward, and also talk about the weather pattern for the beginning of the month of December. My subscription platform starts at $2 a month, and it's patreon.com/meteorologist Joe Cioffi. And that's it. So download the 2 free weather apps if you haven't already on Google Play or on the App Store, the Meteorologist Joe Cioffi weather app, and Angry Ben's weather app, the Angry Weatherman. So you got them both. And we will see you live stream tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. All right, that's it. We're done. Now I can go reheat my coffee.